Greetings. I have a slightly unusual pen this week. This is a Hero Model 70. What's unusual about it is the nib, which we'll get to in a minute, but let's just talk about the outside of the pen for a bit. It's a metal construction, thin, very thin pen. It weighs, despite the fact that it's all metal, it only weighs 18 grams because it's a thin pen and not a particularly big pen either. Here it is compared to a Lamy Safari and a Pilot Metropolitan. As you can see, it's a bit shorter than these pens and much, much thinner. So this is a thin, smallish pen. The material, it's got a lacquered type coating on the material, which is very dark gray, almost black, with very tiny multicolored flecks in it. It actually looks quite nice. Around the end of the cap, it says Hero and 70. It says Hero on the clip, and it has a fairly standard clip that's a little bit on the stiff side but very functional. The top of the cap and the bottom of the pen have fairly identical white plastic insets. It is a pull to cap pen, and it does post, but not particularly securely. So you have to kind of really have to push it to stay on there, and it might slip off a little bit. But it does post, but you're really gonna have to kind of work it in there to get it to post. Now, the section is a fairly long section, and given the size of the pen, it's a completely smooth, shiny section. So if you have an issue with slippery sections, you might not be crazy about this. And it has a tiny little step here, which is nothing to speak of, and it really only has this little weird looking little rim here, but no real sort of lip to keep your fingers off the nib if that's an issue for you. Now, let's talk about the nib. This is a very, very unusual nib. It is essentially a multi-sided nib. You could basically write with the nib in pretty much any orientation, and it will still write just fine. I thought the theory behind this pen is that one side is supposed to be one size nib, and one side is supposed to be the other. So in other words, you get different writing thicknesses. That doesn't really prove itself out, at least in the one that I have, so we'll see that a bit in a writing sample. So the point of this is a little bit lost on me. That's no pun intended. One thing that is nice, if you're not a fountain pen guy and you kind of don't like the fact that you have to orient the nib on a fountain pen, I guess it maybe addresses that issue. But beyond that, not an issue that not something that I think really let's put it this way, it's a solution in search of a problem, best on what I can tell. Parker made a pen with a very, very similar nib back in the old days. I don't think it was particularly successful, again because I'm not really sure what the point of it is. There's not a lot to say about this pen. That's basically it. Oh yeah, let's talk about the filling mechanism. So if I didn't sound like I'm crazy about the nib, I'm even less crazy about the filling mechanism. This pen has what I literally consider to be the worst filling mechanism of any type of pen. It is a built-in aerometric filler. So if you've seen other videos of mine before, I've gone on about what I don't like about these. So the way this works is it's basically a permanently mounted sack with a breather tube that runs through it, this metal shield, and a bar. So the theory is you push on the bar, it compresses the sack, and then it fills. The problem is you get a very poor fill. You really can't fill this more than about halfway up. This whole sheath doesn't really do a heck of a lot. It does come off. The whole point of it really, I think, is to protect the breather tube from getting cracked, etc. So you could actually do it, if you do it carefully, by just squeezing the tube right there. And these are not easy to clean because of that, because essentially it's just like any sack filler. You really just have to just squeeze it and drain it and squeeze it and drain it until it comes clean. So it's a tough pen to clean, doesn't get a big fill. This is probably my least favorite mechanism found on any filling mechanism found on any pen. So be that as it may, let's see, as we always say, pens are meant to write. So let's see how this guy writes, and we're going to find that out right now. Okay, folks, what we're writing with here is a Hero number 70, and this has a steel nib, and I would call this a fine by pretty much any measure, maybe even in some people's books an extra fine. It's quite a fine nib. So that's it flipped this way. If I just simply take it and flip it over, the expectation was that you get a different width line, but I'm really not seeing it. So I'll flip it back again. Let's just do that twice. I'm not seeing much in the way of difference in the line, but the nice thing is you can pretty much write with it on either side, or you can even write with it sideways either way, and it writes essentially with pretty much any orientation, kind of like a ballpoint. I mean, you're almost at the point here where why are you even using a fountain pen? You might as well just use a ballpoint or something. It's also obviously not going to give you any flex at all. So you don't get anything like that. So you don't get any line variation, etc. Again, this is one of these, it's a kind of a gimmicky nib. There's nothing wrong with it. Let's just put it this way. It writes smoothly. It flows pretty decently. I don't have any complaints about the way it writes. So it's not like it's a bad pen or a defective pen in some way. I just don't get the point of what this nib is supposed to be for, or what it is. It's a little bit of a gimmick. Not a particularly expensive pen. We're talking about an under $10 pen here. So, it might be worth a shot if this sort of thing appeals to you. But again, not something that it's a little thin. It's a little thin for my taste aesthetically and comfort-wise. It has what I consider to be a bad filling mechanism, and a interesting but somewhat pointless nib. So this is not one of my favorite pens, but again, it's not a major investment. If it suits your fancy aesthetically, and if you think this nib might be something you want to try out, definitely give it a shot. But again, not something that I would urge everybody to run out and get. So I think I pretty much made my point, pun intended there, on this pen. Let's talk about this ink a little bit. So I do actually like this ink quite a bit. So this ink is Noodler's V-Mail North African Violet. Okay, so this is basically a very pretty purple, very pretty violet from Noodler's. It's a really, really nice, true violet colored ink. This is part of their line that is meant to recreate inks of the World War II era. So it's got this kind of cool bottle where it has different aircraft on the label. It comes in the standard Noodler's 3-ounce bottle, and it's a relatively inexpensive ink. So good deal for the money, like all Noodler's inks are. Now, V-Mail, why it's called V-Mail is interesting. So it's named after V-Mail, which was a system for people back home to write soldiers overseas during World War II. So you had a special letter that you would fill out, and then it would be microfilmed, and then it would be sent across, and then printed out for the soldiers. So in a sense, I don't want to say it's like email, but it is a little bit like email in the sense that the thing that the recipient is reading is not a physical document that was sent from sender to receiver end to end. So in that sense, it does predate email, but it was a way of keeping the weight down of all the mail that went between home and the front in World War II. So that's why it's named after this V-mail, and it's supposedly a recreation of colors of ink that were widely used during the World War II era. I actually do like this particular shade quite a bit. It is one of my favorite actual purple/violet shades because it is a real purple, I guess. A lot of purples tend to be very, very bluish, etc. and so forth, but this is kind of the real deal, and that's what I like about it. And it is a pretty well-behaved ink, has fairly decent dry time, does not bleed through the paper or anything like that. So good ink, not so great pen this week. So I think that will just about do it. As always, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. Keep those comments and those thumbs up flowing as usual. And until next time, have a good day. Bye-bye.